You're good. Well, welcome. Good evening, and welcome to Ames Public Libraries for tonight's Intellectual Freedom and Kids panel discussion. My name is Jill. I'm a Youth Services Library Assistant, and tonight we're offering this program as a way to connect you to the world of ideas. We'd also like to invite you to join us for future programs, which you can learn more about through our current issue of Page One or by signing up for our events email. Tonight's program will last about an hour and include time at the end for questions. So if you're joining us online, just know that right now we'll be muting your microphone during the presentation, so you can go ahead and submit your questions via chat. The link should be at the bottom of your screen, and my fellow staff member Susan will be monitoring the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. Today's session is being recorded, and it will be posted to Ames Public Library's YouTube channel after the program ends. If you get bumped out of the program, please go back to the original link and you'll be able to get right back in. The link will be dropped into the chat too. Okay, so I'd like to start out by thanking you for attending and letting you know how much we at the library appreciate people who come to our programs. We really have the best customers a library could have. So tonight's program kind of grew out of my own curiosity. We have quite a few children and caregivers who come in and struggle to find books. Sometimes a parent and child disagree over the reading levels of books to check out, a Disney princess book or a classic. Sometimes a child wants to read a book that their parent thinks might be too old for them, or the book doesn't always align with their family beliefs. Sometimes a child wants to see someone like themselves in a story, and sometimes caregivers think that it's time to move beyond the graphic novels or the potty humor their child thinks is the greatest thing ever. And sometimes there are controversial books that some people think shouldn't even be offered as a choice for children. So how do children choose their books, and how much influence do books actually have on children's lives? And how can you support your child's reading choices? Those are some things we'd like to address tonight, and we want you to walk away from this feeling more confident in the book choices you make for your children and the book choices that your children make for themselves. So now I'd like tonight's panel to introduce themselves, and if they would also name a book that they might remember reading as a child that might have been a little controversial, or maybe not. For me, I'll start. This shows my age. It was 1975, and Judy Blume's book Forever came out. And in that one, a young girl has her first sexual experience. And one of my friends' group had the book, and we passed it all around. And everybody hid it under their beds so that their mothers didn't know they were reading it. And I think back on that now, and my mother let me read whatever I wanted. And yet there was something about the controversy surrounding that book that I felt like I had to hide it away. And I really hope that my children never did that, but I've honestly never asked them, didn't think about it. So I think if you don't mind, we'll start way at the far end.
My name is Clarissa Thompson. I am a master degree educator. I've been in education for 25 years. I have actually taught first grade and kindergarten for 10 of those years. So I have a lot of primary age experience as well. And then went back to grad school and obtained my K-12 teacher library degree. So I've actually been a teacher librarian for the last 15 years. I'm also currently on the Iowa Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee, and I am the current vice president of the Iowa Association of School Librarians. My favorite book that actually, when I was a kid, I hated reading, and I tell my kids that, my students that all the time. They are completely shocked. And I always tell them, well, sometimes it takes people longer than others to find the right book and to actually become a reader. Just because you think you aren't a reader doesn't mean you are not a reader. So one of the books that I actually, it was the first time I was finally assigned something to read that I liked, was A Wrinkle in Time. And for me, that book had, some controversy. I don't think I knew about it at the time. I didn't really keep up with that stuff when I was a kid, but for me, it was the first time I read a book with a strong and smart female protagonist in the book. And for me, that was huge, and it was different than everything else that I had read. So it was an important book for me, and it was kind of the beginning of the start, along with a friend introducing Sweet Valley Twins to me, which I will show my age, and of course loved all the Judy Blume. But yeah, it took me a long time to even become a reader, and it's just getting those opportunities to try a variety. Eventually you get there.
I'm Sarah Hayden Paris, and I am the president and founder of Annie's Foundation, which is a anti-censorship group based out of Johnston, founded in 2022 in response to book bans in our school district. And one of our main objectives is to make it easier to hand out or to get banned and challenged books. So we hand them out for free at various events. And so far we've handed out over 5,300 books. And I think the first book I can think of that really made a difference to me was The Giver by Lois Lowry. I remember reading that shortly after it came out. It was an assigned reading assignment for, I was in 7th grade, and something about it just resonated with me. I think the fact that the main character kind of rebels against society to follow what he knows is right. That's just something that I valued. And I think at the time, since I was reading it as it was new, there wasn't a whole lot of controversy, but I remember maybe like a year later, I started hearing about people who were upset about the book being offered to kids. And I was like 13 or 14. I did not understand why. I still don't, because it's a great book.
My name is Sarah Perez, and thank you. And I am a instructor of early childhood literacy and literacy at Iowa State University. I teach a class frequently called Critical Perspectives on Children and Young Adults Literature. And that class has focused in large part on really defining what appropriateness means and contextualizing the definitions of appropriateness in various contexts. And I, through that more academic approach, have really been more active in trying to consider my legislative responsibility. So it's really led to some more activism on my part. I also work at Des Moines Performing Arts and write curriculum for children's theater. And so that part of my life also has a lot of time in the schools and in professional development and arts integration. A book that was significant to me, that was a controversial one, was, well, first, I found my mom's copy of Our Bodies, Ourselves on the shelf, and I felt like it provided me all the information I needed to know. So she also would not have said, don't look at that book, but it wasn't necessarily maybe the chosen reading level for my, like, I don't know, 7-year-old self, but I did learn some interesting facts. I also was deeply into this book that my 5th grade teacher had on her little like carousel of books in the classroom. And there were an entire series, and they were all just like girls' first names, fancy girls' first names, Victoria and Emily and Christine. And it was like romancy books, but I don't think that anybody actually had a sexual experience on the page, but just like the whole thing was about historical romance. I don't know whether Mrs. Barta didn't look deeply at what those books were going on, or maybe she was just happy to let people discover something exciting in those shelves. A series of paperbacks really did it. Yep.
It is amazing what sticks with you. Yeah. And what kids are attracted to at different ages. I always get a kick out of that. Okay. So Sarah, I think I'm going to start with you. Can you talk about why the idea of choice is important to a child's growth or development?
Well, I think that this is not a space that I need to be very academic about, particularly because I think it's just as a human, when something is required, it becomes much less attractive. Or when it's being forced on you as something that you must do, or as being chosen by somebody else, it's a yuckier experience to encounter that thing or your attitude moving into it. So in order for kids to be able to be vested and interested and maintain their identities as readers, there has to be an element of them being able to select and self-select and determine when a book's not working for them. We obviously do have required books and all kinds of curricular points in a student's experience in school, but the opportunities that they have to make those choices are all that more important because, you're not always getting that option. So required is often not where you fall in love. And we need kids to be falling in love with reading in some capacity in order to get better at it and to stay strong as readers.
Okay, thank you. And I should point out too, that if anybody has anything to add, please feel free to speak up and join in. Not a problem at all here.
Okay, great.
Okay. The other question I had is something that a few years ago, Monica Hesse was here, and she's a young adult author, and she was fantastic to listen to. And she was talking about quality literature. And we get that a lot from parents here at the library. They want their child to be reading quality literature, but that kind of means different things to different people. And Monica said there really isn't there's no good literature, there's no bad literature, there's just what you're willing to read. And I wonder how you feel about that statement, any of you.
I'm the parent of two boys who really only like to read graphic novels and manga. And as much as I try to get them to read things like The Giver or Ender's Game, you know what? At the end of the day, I'm happy they're reading, and they both have amazing vocabularies and are good at writing. So I don't think that their preferred choice of reading material is harming them in any way.
Yeah. And I think quality literature is anytime that you have something that a person reads and they're invested in it in any way. Like what's quality to me could be different than what's quality to someone else, because it is quality. It probably can be interpreted in many different ways and people connect to it in many different ways. So I feel like, to me, a lot of it has that component. And when I think about it, like even, you do hear that a lot about graphic novels, don't read graphic novels. And I know my daughter's heard that a little bit. She's a huge graphic novel person. And we've talked about it, and we've talked about how, well, it depends on the purpose of the reading, that in school, sometimes the goal is reading stamina, and maybe a graphic novel isn't the best item for that particular goal. But when it comes to her heart and what she will read over and over and over, and I've recently found out that she even tested pretty high on visual intelligence. And I was like, that totally makes sense why you're drawn to graphic novels. Like, I'd hate to hinder anything. So really, it's what you make it out to be too, and to a certain extent. If it's something that you connect to, then it's meaningful to you. It's quality of some kind,
Yeah, I agree with all of those statements and think that also we have to contextualize or consider what has been traditionally included in canonical texts or how we're defining classic. Often those things are really viewed through a lens that isn't always the most inclusive lens to even create those definitions. Whoever determines what matters or what voices matter, what's quality and what's not quality, like those are not blank designations or neutral designations. They're built upon structures that haven't always been very inclusive to a variety of voices and perspectives. So even that notion of like, there are some books that are quality and there are some books that are not quality, I feel like is a contested space. However, I do agree if you've read 400 Princess Kitty books, like you probably did it. You probably mastered it, but then that's not what that book is doing for you. Like there was a study that was about the choices people make when they're selecting television viewing, right? So I think this is, there's a common theme in the way that we select familiar television programs that have familiar characters that we want to see them reenact even the same episode that we'll watch multiple times. Like there is something just so human about the familiarity of encountering Princess Kitty and her formulaic sense problem that she's going to resolve by the end. That there's something so human about just wanting to feel safe in that plot line that I think we're not sometimes acknowledging as necessary in the process of finding enjoyment in reading. But it's supposed to be cozy in some ways too, not always only about intellectual rigor. So let Princess Kitty live. Just let her do it.
I understand that so much. When I was in college, I was an English major and we were reading Moby Dick and these serious things. And I would go to the public library and bring these children's books home because it was that familiarity and that comfort and something I knew the ending, what it was going to be. It was predictable and I could relax and enjoy it.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter what age you are. There's a lot of truth to that. I hear parents often complaining too about how we're reading this book for the 16th time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's that same thing that comes in there.
Of course we're reading it for the, I mean, I think also when adults are looking at the choices of children and the choices that children are making, especially in those repetitive or favorites, you know, like I too felt like I want to skip this page that has all these, this long detailing about the hat, right? Like there were books that I would, when chosen by my daughter from the read aloud pile, I would feel, you know, not as thrilled to participate in that reading again. But there's so much there for them that you as an adult, maybe you don't need to see those same rhythmic patterns repeated over and over again. It's not having that same impact on you necessarily that it is, but it's doing a different kind of work for the child. And those, that, I mean, completely developmentally appropriate, but also an important part of the developmental process and familiarity and learning about how books function. So it's not that they're not doing it right. It's just you as an adult are not always getting the same exact thing out of it as they are.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never thought of it in those terms. So that's really interesting. Okay. How do caregivers navigate the balance between supporting a child's independence and wanting to choose their own books, and yet they don't want those books for their child? They don't want those graphic novels. They want to move past that, but that is what the child really, really wants to read. And obviously in school, they're probably not reading that with the classroom, but you get stuck in that fine point. And I know at the library here, we've had a bit of an impasse now and then between parents and their kids. And I don't know how you guys navigate that stuff more in the schools, especially.
Well, you know, we collaborate a lot with the teachers as well. And so a lot of times when teachers bring classes in, they will have a goal in mind, which is part of our library, is to support the classrooms and their curriculum and their learning. So there are times, you know, that a teacher says you need to have a novel, or you need to have a historical fiction, or you need to have a nonfiction or on a certain topic because it aligns with what they're working on in class. And of course, we always help with that and support with that. But we, from the library standpoint, always encourage full access and choice, and we allow them to have more than one book. So the way I balance that, and even as a parent, is I'm like, okay, you can have this book, you choose one that you're really interested in, and it, you know, it's whatever you want. You can always have something that is just for you that you want, but then you also have these other goals that you're working on in class. So if your teacher says you have to have a novel, grab a novel, but if you still want an Elephant and Piggy and book, go ahead and do that too, you know, like, and I feel like I get a lot of like fifth graders who still love to go back and pick some of those picture books up and feel like they shouldn't, or maybe even, you know, people say you're too old for that, but really all the things that you mentioned. But also I think we forget sometimes there's value to things that we aren't even thinking about, like picture books actually do have a really high Lexile reading level compared to a lot of the chapter books that they're checking out. They actually have a very high and rich vocabulary. A lot of those books have words in it that are often found on the college admittance exams and there, you know, and then just the love. I mean, I've seen in the same moment, you know, when we're hosting a book fair or something and a parent comes in and goes, oh, when they see a favorite character. So it's like, sometimes I think as adults, we can forget those connections and the friendships we've made with books. And it's just, the way we balance it is by trying to support all of the different needs, but also making sure that the kids always have access to a variety and can have that choice.
I also think that the first, yay for parents for bringing their kids to the library. I think if you're bringing your kid to the library and engaging with in a conversation with them about the kinds of books that they're getting, or you're curious and engaged in that process, like, I feel like your work here is almost done. Like, you really have done a lot of what you need to be doing in order to set up a positive relationship with the library as a lifelong resource and with books in general. So don't bungle it at the end by making it then be like a negative, right? Where you're already doing the good job of bringing them here and it's a positive space for them to engage with. So the thing that I would advise for families, and what I have done in my own household and work with on pre-service teachers, is not to treat it like the way that we sort of categorize food, right? Like that's a treat food and that's a healthy food, because then it makes those like healthy food things feel less, even more unappetizing or unappealing as a reader to want to engage with. But you have to build supports around the thing that you want your kid to engage with that are not necessarily the book itself. So like reading it in a book club, and then you suggest one, and then the family reads that, and then they suggest one and the family reads that, and you discuss and you get together. But it's like not just reading the book, it's also you're eating popcorn with a special treat in it, or like you're getting a cozy chair, you're putting a candle on, like whatever you're doing to make that feel like it's also a special moment. If you're choosing a good book, they're going to like it. Just come on. You have to make it seem like incentivized to want to participate in the practice of, you know, like cozy up that environment. And I think that then allows them to be like, all right, I actually do love the Phantom Toll Booth, or what, you know, whatever. This is actually kind of great. I just needed a boost in. Yeah. I think pizza. Maybe. We'll take it.
So then one of the things I see also at the library is older elementary students coming in and they don't know how to find a book that they want.
Mhm.
And I was kind of curious, I'm assuming it's a skill that needs to be learned, but how do you teach that, especially kids who don't want to take the time to browse through things? I don't know if you have any advice on that.
Mhm.
Anybody?
Well, I know through our curriculum, we do a lot of practicing finding books and looking for books in for many different ways, and also digital resources, not just books, but we try to educate them on what's all available to them, and we try to have opportunities to practice, and we model things. You know, we model talking about, you know, reading back covers of books or reading the front inserts, or giving, I know a lot of teachers have done like reading the first page. And if you're trying to get something that's like a just right difficulty, you know, making sure if you have too many words that are too challenging, you probably aren't going to be interested in it anyway, but you're trying to find something. We've done just all sorts of things with talking about avid readers also know how to put a book down, and we model examples of not every book is for every person, and sometimes you don't know if it's for you until you get started. And even adults will start a book that you go, for whatever reason. I just had a book last week that I started and I'm like, some of these in my pile are looking better than this one. It just wasn't doing it for me, you know? So I just think talking about that a lot and practicing that a lot and them knowing what's out there, I think libraries can be overwhelming because there is a lot. And I think they tend to go toward what they know. It's like, when kids come in and they're like, where's the Diary of a Wimpy Kid? I think part of it is they don't know what the other choices are. And I think a big way we can help them is, we try to book talk books, introduce them to some new books, publicize, point out connections between authors. Like, you read this by this author. Did you know this author also writes a book in this genre? And, branching them and trying to bridge those connections and ties. And it is hard and overwhelming. Sometimes I'm overwhelmed when I walk in. I'm like, I don't know what I feel like today. And we talk to kids a lot when they come in. It's like an interview, customer service. They tell me all the time, I don't know what to read, or they'll say, do you have any good books? And so my question is always, I'm like, yeah, we have a lot of good books, but what I want to know is, what are you interested in? What do you want to read? Is there a certain genre you like? What is something you've read that you liked? Maybe I can help you find something similar. And so it's really just talking and having those connections and conversations that we can kind of help them navigate a little bit more.
That reminds me of a
Yeah.
story. I was in the schools and I did have a teacher. She was anxious to get out of the class, out of the library with the kids. It was time to go. And she had a little boy who was like, but I can't find anything. And she goes, well, you just pick a book. And he goes, but I don't know which ones are good. And she goes, but they're all good.
It's probably accurate. They're not all maybe good for you, but they're all like, take a chance. I have also found that the power of peer mentorship has arguably more power for perseverance than adult leadership does. So if your child or if your classroom already has a component where students are talking about books in some way, formalizing that or making a book wall recommendation or making a place where they can make I worked with a class where we made book trailers of their own. And that was really a popular way to get students to be thinking about, oh, so-and-so read that and they thought it was good. And so maybe I'm going to give it a chance too, even if it wasn't, I'm not necessarily into skateboarding, but like maybe they seem to really like it. So they're willing to take a chance on it through that peer networking. There also are a lot of, if they're already on YouTube Kids or on any kind of social media platform, there are all kinds of good resources that you can get plugged into, and that can maybe help them sort of get jazzed about something before they get in here. Also, just a more practical tip, I almost never go to the fiction section. Like, as a reader, I'm usually not in the big shelves, right? Like, I'm in the new fiction section. And so partly because it is overwhelming to go into the big land. So I stay sort of in the new fiction section because the books are outward facing and I feel like I can see if that cover seems cute to me, so I'm already doing some modifying of the overwhelm by just saying, I'm going to find something in this section. Or maybe I'll say I'm only going to look really through the A's and B's today and the authors. And so sometimes I have had success in telling kids just look on this shelf. Something on here is going to be great for you. And it's not necessarily, why don't you search through the whole place to find a nugget that you're looking for? Why don't we break this down for you into more manageable chunks? And then next time you can go over there to M's. But for today, just the A's.
Yeah, so I want to tack on to something that you said about peer influence. And I don't know if either of you have read Teens Choosing to Read.
No.
Okay,
Yes, get on
have
it.
you?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just came out in November, but so it's a study. It was an inner city school. It was 8th grade, and the school's entire English program, throughout the traditional curriculum, and all they did all year was they had 200 young adult books that the kids could choose from, and they had 2 to 3 copies of each. So there was a scarcity element there, and and the kids helped the teachers choose some of the books, and the teachers also purchased some based on, recommendations and reviews and everything. And so a lot of these kids were not proficient at reading at the start, and most of them didn't read any books for pleasure and maybe completed 1 book assignment per school year. By the end of the year, these kids were reading over 40 books. They were reading at home. They were trying to get their parents to read. They were getting their friends to read. And then, so if I came back to school and was really excited about this book I read, then, there's only one other copy. So then all the other kids want to read it. And yeah, it was super, super cool. And it makes me like fall in love with like the magic of reading all over again, because you see the huge difference it had in these kids' lives. They did, most of them did pass their proficiency, they were proficient on their state exams for the first time, and they were very excited about that. And their teachers and their parents also said that the kids were like, they became better humans because they had more empathy and understanding, and were able to, they talk about how they liked the more disturbing books because it gave them like the opportunity to think through situations that maybe they had been in the past or could see themselves in the future, and how they might navigate those. It's super, super cool. But yeah, so like they really use the influence of peers to make them want to read more, and just all the results from it. And then of course they went back a few years later, and the kids had not, they'd gone back to traditional English classes and they were not reading, but they all look back on that time very fondly and like, oh, I wish that I still had the ability to do that. And I liked who I was back then. So teens choosing to read.
Teens choosing to read. Yeah, I think that's an important lesson for, this is, I think, a tricky thing about having children who are teens, being in educational spaces with teens, or like as a parent, it's not a withdrawal necessarily, but it's an allowing of some independence to be flourishing in those spaces, and understanding that like you are not the arbiter of developmentally, you are no longer necessarily the primary voice, certainly of what's cool, but even of like what's going to be motivating, right? So it's not a rejection. It's just what is like naturally developmentally happening for kids. So those peer voices are really powerful to them. So if you can plug them in with some peers who are saying, it's cool books, like that will also get you some much more ground than just the insistence as the grown-up in the room. I mean, grown-ups are good too, but yeah, you've lost some of your sheen that maybe you had when you were with a 4-year-old, because they're really jazzed to do whatever you think is cool, but not at 14.
So with something of what you said made me think, one of the other things we have when parents come in is they can be very concerned that their children are reading books that are much too violent, that are too graphic, and they seem to be under the impression that this is really going to damage their child if they read these things. And I'm wondering if anybody can speak to any of that. How much truth is there to that?
I can take that one first. Yeah, certainly there, it goes back to not every book is right for every person. And I think that as parents or caregivers or teachers, a big part of teaching our kids to learn how to read and just make decisions that are in their own best interest and to speak up for themselves is to know when to put a book down. Like, I put books down all the time because they're just not catching my interest, and that's okay. I can also put a book down because it's just like I couldn't get through the beginning of Life of Pi because of the boat scene. And yes, I have never picked that book up again, and I'm still traumatized by those pages, but I also stopped and put it down. But that's an important skill for our kids to learn, and that applies to other life situations as well. Like, when do you need to remove yourself from a situation to protect yourself? And if we don't give our kids the chance to flex those muscles, then when they do go out into the world as adults, they may find themselves in situations that they don't know how to remove themselves from. And there can be some pretty big consequences that are a lot bigger than reading something that you don't really like in a book. I also always like to point out that, I think that there's this trend of no longer trusting experts. And people need to remember, I think a lot of people don't know that librarians are highly trained people with advanced degrees. And, you know, this is their life's work. Same with teachers. Like no one goes into these professions with a desire to harm your child. And library collections and classroom collections are carefully curated by people who know what they're doing. They cite, you know, they might have read the books themselves. They cite multiple journals to figure out what the best materials are. So there's a lot of thought that goes into that process. And I think we have to trust the process. You know, I'm not a librarian. I'm not a teacher. I'm a healthcare administrator. So I am definitely not the best person to be making judgments about books. So I trust that the people who have gone to school for those things and dedicated their lives to it are the ones that, you know, I'm going to trust their advice. So I think that it's important to just recognize the professionals who do this and allow our children to you know, kind of operate under the environment that's been created for them and to protect them.
And I just want to stand up and like applaud right now. Thank you for on behalf of all the librarians. No, I don't think people realize the amount of work that goes into book selection and that we aren't just randomly buying things. Yes, when the new Dog Man comes out, I randomly put it in my purchase order because I just know it's going to be needed. I don't even have to review anything about Dog Man. They will take me down if I don't get the new book. Like there are things like that, but then there's a lot of evaluating the collection as a whole and a lot to the selection. And when we're talking about books, we are also looking at, to a certain degree, like I support elementary buildings. And so I've had parents call me and concerned about books that have been in the news and things. And I tell them, we don't have that book. We've never had that book. We're in elementary school. Children are not reading these books that you're currently concerned about just because of everything going on in the media. And so we are looking at, you know, what the book recommendations are. We're not reading just parent reviews online. We are not doing that. We are looking at professional review journals, multiple reviews. We're looking at the actual collection and analyzing what gaps are and things. And we're trying to meet all of our kids and families' needs and interests. And I think what I really want to say that I think sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but parents and teachers and librarians, we are all on the same side. Like I really want to choose that perfect book that somebody needs for every kid in our building. And I want them all to be able to leave ready for society, being good citizens. I want them to, you know, be able to work with a variety of people, to be able to learn and access information, to keep teaching themselves as new things in our world get created. I want them to be able to have empathy and compassion. We all want our kids to go out into the world that way. We're all on the same side. I know, and I tell my kids all the time, like we talk about that when you're talking about maybe they'll read something that's maybe above them or too scary or too graphic. And I tell them all the time, like, I cannot do scary stories. That is not me. Like, I just can't, but I'm not going to stop you from doing it. And why do kids love scary stories so much? Because it's a safe place for them to access not only that feeling, but to do some critical thinking and some problem solving, because as they're reading, they're inferring and they're thinking about the situation in a safe environment, and it's exciting. So for them, they love it. For me, not so much. But I would never not buy the current, you know, whatever they're asking for a horror book. I also think that kids are really good at self-moderating. I think we need to at some point trust our kids and give them some credit. And to have conversations with them, like as a parent, both of my kids are elementary age, and I'm always talking to them about stuff as it comes up, whether it's something that came off the bus that they heard and they mentioned, or it's something they read in a book, whatever it is. And I'm asking them about it, and we're talking about it. And when they come up with concerns in a book, like they're pretty good at, they know if something doesn't feel right about it, they could quit it, or they might ask about it, or they might gloss over it. I feel a lot of times there are things in books that adults read way more into it than the kid reads into it. It's kind of like when I watch an old PG movie from the 80s when I was a kid, or I hear a song that I hadn't heard since I was in high school. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I did not know that was in there, because when I was at that age, that wasn't the part I was taking in. I have, as an adult, way more background knowledge, and I'm able to infer way more than what the kids are able to get out of it. And if they are understanding it, they probably already have a certain baseline knowledge that they're able to think about it in their own way. If it's above their level at the time, it's probably a book they end up quitting. Like I've had younger kids pick up a book that was like a historical fiction book. They started reading it and they're like, I don't even get what's going on, because they hadn't learned about that yet in curriculum. So it didn't have meaning to them. So they brought it back. They're very good at that. I've had a student who talked to me a little bit, doesn't like a lot of gory stuff, doesn't like dark parts in movies. They like pretty tame things, and then brought a graphic novel to me and said, there was like a little bit of blood in that book. And I was just like, oh, well, how did it make you feel? Like, were you okay with it? Did it bother you? What do you think you're going to do? And the response was, well, actually, it didn't bother me as much because it was just a still page. It didn't seem as real as what I would see in a movie. And it made sense with the story. Like a kid told me that. They're just very good at moderating their own. When they're ready for it, they will bring things up, or they will ask. They might put something down and never speak about it again, but they might ask. And a lot of times it's a great opportunity for a parent to talk to your kid and to find out what they're actually thinking. And you might be surprised what they're thinking. You might be a little, hey, yeah, about what they're thinking. I just think we got to give kids more credit for that and put a little bit of trust into them too.
Yes. The idea that a lot of what is seen as most potentially fraught for parents, acknowledging that might not be the level or the way in which the child is understanding it, I think is a really valid concern. And the thing of like, I don't understand what's happening in this book is very real. Like, oh, I don't even know what's going on. If it's really above where they're at developmentally, it's probably not going to be an appealing text. I would think about the ways in which children are consuming all types of media. So a lot of the conversations we're having, I guess as a state and as a larger national body, are about the patrolling and curtailing of access to books or to texts. And those same conversations aren't necessarily happening with the same fervor about other types of media. So the power of the book is coming all from within the mechanism of the human mind. So they're reading a word on the page, and their mental picture that they're creating is all within their control. So maybe it's not a horrifying murder. It's happening behind a cloak. Like they're creating those protective barriers for themselves within their imaginations, because they're controlling in some way the level of scary that gets allowed in. That is not the case if you're watching a movie, or if you're watching even a cartoon. I would I don't want to come down on big cartoon or, really insult the industry in any way, but I would wager a guess that the likelihood that more violent incidences occur within a 30-minute television program that a child is taking in as even as an age appropriate choice than is happening within the books, with less nuance and complexity than is what is happening in the books. So I think giving children a chance to rehearse their fears in a safe way. We also are sending our children out, whether we like it or not, into a world that is full of things that are potentially scary. So sending them out there with no opportunity to address or think critically about what those things are or what they mean or what that could mean for them isn't really doing them a service. So, sure, should a kindergartner be reading a series of violent texts? Probably no, but I'm guessing that they're not choosing that. So, giving some grace to allowing them a chance to rehearse some of those things mentally, control the picture of what that is, really gives them psychological access to some things that they need to kind of build themselves up to be able to go out there into the world. So, I've had much scarier nightmares about movies that I've seen, or about even like strange sightings that you've had in the world about, stuff that happened, than I have about a book that I've read. It just doesn't feel, at least in my experience or in the experiences of the people that, I have talked to. So anecdotally, like it's not, I read this book and now I'm like horrified to go to bed. It's usually that's not the source.
Mhm.
It's something else. Maybe we have to work through those things anyway. I mean, there is some truth to like maybe being a little scared and working it out is a value. There is value in that. This construction of innocence is maybe not as useful as a tool for forever and ever.
I would say so.
Maybe.
That's my opinion only.
Yeah.
If we could switch gears a little bit, and can we talk about the diversity and seeing diversity in books, and why is it important for a BIPOC person, and also why it's important for a white person to be reading diverse books?
Yeah, so a large part of what Annie's Foundation tries to do, actually our mission statement, is to ensure that members of our community have unhindered access to books and characters that reflect the diversity and complexity of the world around them. So it's really important that we have reading materials that are available where everyone can see themselves in those stories. We know that when people don't see themselves reflected in the books that they read, continually, it does have adverse psychological outcomes. It sends the message that, their stories aren't worth telling, their voice isn't worth hearing, that any stereotypes that exist about them in literature are true. And I mean, and obviously that's not how you connect, young readers with a love of reading if they can't relate to their life experiences. But another thing that I often think about is that being a parent of two white boys growing up in Johnston, where everyone around them looks like them and, is probably, raised Christian and affluence and all these other things that, we would assume about the suburbs. I grew up in a much more diverse area. So I often think about like, how do I get my kids to understand and have empathy for other people's lived experiences, because I was exposed to those, but they don't, through no fault of their own, they don't have a chance to flex those muscles. And one of the ways that we can do that is by making books available to them where they can read about other people's experiences and relate to, the African-American boy who is trying to help his brother while he's going to school and they're in a refugee camp. Like they can relate to that story of brotherhood and worrying about, how their sibling is doing and wanting what's best for them, even though they are living in different countries and very different circumstances and all those things. So same with, stories with LGBTQ characters, like helping them to understand, if, it might help them put into words feelings that they're having. And also it's important for them to see LGBTQ characters having successful and happy lives so that they know that that's, a possibility as opposed to maybe some of the other things they see in the media. And also to be able to support their friends who may be questioning their identity or their sexuality so that they know and have empathy and can, guide them through some of those things. So I think that is just so important, especially living in a place like Iowa where we don't have a lot of access to, maybe we just don't get to know a whole lot of diverse people in our lives, but this is one of the ways that we can connect with them and teach our children about them.
There is the Rudine Bishop Sims theory of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. I first started teaching this course at Iowa State to pre-service teachers. It's probably been 7 years or something like that. So at that point in time, when we were introducing that theory and talking about the idea of books needing to be both a reflection, a mirror, or a window and access point into other people's worldviews, or a sliding glass door, which is really kind of another window, but you enter more fully. Anyway, so that theory felt kind of like, listen, guys, I'm going to tell you something and it's going to be amazing and your minds are going to be blown. And then now when we try to reference it, they're like, yes, we've heard, yes, we have heard it. We've been hearing it. We're on, like we're no longer having the same caliber of conversations as I was having even, within my tenure within teaching that course. So I think that we are making, shout out to Iowa State teacher ed program, I guess, that there are some, more complex conversations happening around representation, and we're moving into being able to have, not just, it's important to have depictions of different racial or ethnic or religious or socioeconomic groups or whatever, but that those should be humanizing portraits, and that not all representation is created equal when it comes to text. So really being careful, or being not just saying, oh, here's a book that features a character of color, and so like I've done my job, check. Like it's also the questions you ask or the discussions you have around those characters. And is this depiction simply another stereotype, but in a nice book format? Like, is there a way that is humanizing or complexifying the stories of others? In terms of what the value is, I mean, I hear pre-service teachers say things like, well, I'm going to teach in a place that's like really rural, so we're only going to have white kids there or whatever, which may be false. Also, they are in just as much need of understanding that themselves and their place in the world is not necessarily central or the most important. Like understanding the validity of other people's experiences is part of the work of being of a human person, or part of what the educational system should, in my opinion, aim to do, right? That if you're seeing yourself as the main character, or I think as the teens say, main character energy, then you maybe have not done all of the work that you need to be doing. You have an opportunity to engage in other people's stories. But if you're the star of every book you're reading, or a person like you is the star of every book you're reading, and every story you're encountering on TV, and everything that's happening within your worldview, people who look like you and act like you and believe like you and love like you, that's really giving you a sense that that's what's out there. Like that's the world. And so it's very cognitively complicated when you encounter other people who are not doing that. The immediate human impulse is to feel like that's wrong. So mixing up that story so that when you encounter inevitably people who are not identical to you, you have space to understand them as being equally valuable to the human experience, as opposed to like, ooh, this is off-putting to me because my whole worldview is based on me as the center. And that is not something that necessarily happens naturally, particularly dependent on where you're growing up, or, who is within your immediate community. It's not comfortable, but a book can give you a space to experience like, oh, wait, maybe there's other ways of being that are also equally valuable as the way that I see the world, or I view the world, or as I believe, or whatever.
Thank you.
So if we want to encourage more diversity and more choice of books, and we see that we feel as if our choices are becoming smaller rather than greater, what are some things that we as parents or even just young readers could do to advocate for ourselves and our families and our choices?
Get some
Yeah.
request and buy. And I mean, I think that the market capitalism is a function of what's going to make money, right? So what, that's, I think, the premise. I'm not an economist. You might have gathered that, but things that there's a market for continue to be published. I will see that the improvements I see in the statistical reports about what's being published and the kinds of voices and stories that are represented continue to improve and change. So now our percentages are not like 73% of children's books published are about white children, and then 18% are about trucks or bears, and then like 2% is about any person of color, right? So those statistics, just in terms of racial lines, are improving. But you have to make your requests known to people who have the ability to either purchase or, request, or any way that you can advocate for those kinds of selections within your communities. I think it does matter. And then the effect is that maybe more people who are motivated by book selling will want to make more of those kinds of books.
Mhm. Yeah, I think one of the things that has really surprised me in my work with the foundation is that how many people are unaware of like the volume of book challenges and then what kinds of books are being challenged. There's a couple books that continually make the headlines, and the would-be book banners intentionally only pull out the most salacious parts without context. And, people don't realize that things like To Kill a Mockingbird are still being banned and challenged from schools, not recently in Iowa that I'm aware of, but because we don't want to have difficult conversations about race, and how we used to handle those topics historically. And, people don't realize that it's LGBTQ books and books with people of color, and actually even books about victims of sexual assault that are largely targeted for banning and challenging. So educating people about what do you think this is happening, and these are the stories that are being suppressed, and why do you think that is? Trying to get people to be curious about that. And stay tuned in to what's going on at the state level with books. There have been a lot of troubling bills even just this year in Iowa, and obviously we had SF 496 last year. And the great ways to do that. You don't have to be super involved. I have a hard time staying on top of it. The Iowa Library Association is a great resource to stay on top of that. Sign up for their newsletter. You'll get notifications when there's legislation that you might want to be aware of. But also go to your school board meetings, or at least look at their agenda. Same with library board meetings. You don't have to go to all of them. That's a big ask, but you can spend 5 minutes every other week looking at the agenda to see if there's something on there that you're like, oh, I need to pay attention, and make your voice heard. And then do what you can to ensure that diverse materials are available to the people you love and those in your community. So if you've got little free libraries, fill them up with books that represent all the people in your community. Make sure it's not just 50 Shades of Grey in there.
Well, there's
which-
a lot of copies of 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
People need to get rid of them. I've read them and
Yeah.
they're all done. What are they going to do?
And if that's what you like, that
Yeah.
I fully support
Yes.
but yeah, we
There's a lot
also
of
need to have
copies.
other,
Yeah.
other books available
Mhm.
too. So, that's important. But then, if you've got kids or grandkids, buy them books like Entangle Makes Three and, Stamped, learning about racism and what you can do to stop it. Make sure that you're doing what you can to, get some of those materials in kids' hands.
Susan, we have a question.
We do. One of our at-home attendees likes to read what their grandkids are reading. I remember having to give up when my kids got to really big chapter books.
Mhm.
And this grandma said that her 8th grade granddaughter suggested a book with vivid sexual scenes. And so we were talking earlier, this is me kind of putting this in some context, so I'm not going to read everything up. And she wasn't quite sure about the title and things like that. But, we were talking about like a child's capacity for picturing something violent if it's not something that they've experienced. And so this grandma is like, am I putting more into it than my 8th grader? I also think that as I read this, just as an participant tonight, is that if that 8th grader thought it was really inappropriate, I don't know if they would have recommended it to grandma, or it's a conversation that could happen. But so we haven't really talked about that topic, and I know that's like maybe a whole nother.
No, I mean, it's a valid question, and yay for that
Mhm.
grandma for doing that work.
Yeah.
I guarantee if the 8th grader, I can't guarantee, who knows this 8th grader and the inner workings, but as a person with an 8th grader in my own household, there would never be an instance when she would want to have an uncomfortable conversation if she did not have to, right? So my speculation is that she remembered all of the other parts about the book that were not that part, and maybe would have felt like, oh no, like in the recollection of like, yes, but there was that super graphic sexual part, but like, if that would have been the most essential part of the book or the part that she remembered, I don't think that would have been like, let's read this together. I mean, so I would probably, I would likely be able to guarantee that the grandmother is thinking much more about the import of that section than the 8th grader is. I don't know that 8th graders are all that interested in graphic sexual portrayals at all. Sure, you could. I'm sure that there would be moments in which that would be an enticing topic for an 8th grade person. But I think often there's kind of like just scooting on past that part, even for kids who we would think would maybe be in an age where that would be a curiosity, right? But certainly not with grandma. Sorry that happened to you,
Yeah.
grandma. That's a
And I
tough
do
one.
think kids do skip over
Uh-huh.
parts a lot. If it starts to get into something, or maybe it started to get into something a little
Yeah.
mushy or whatever,
Yes.
because they do self-moderate, like they're
Uh-huh.
not interested in that part. I guess I would start too, I'd read it because awesome. If my kid wanted me to, anytime one of my kids says, read this book, it was so good, I can't not do it. That like is such a rare opportunity. So that's awesome that they have that relationship. But then maybe when you're done, have a conversation. Say, you recommended this book to me. Why did you recommend it? What was your favorite part? Let's talk about it. It's a wonderful invite to be able to talk
Mhm.
about it. And I think you're right. Like most of the time, a lot of the books that came up or showed up on lists this year through some of the legislator work, I was reading through some of the titles that I had read and I was like, what? I don't remember anything. And that, like, it's not the most important part of the book. It's usually a very tiny detail that enhances story, but not enough that that's not what stays with me,
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's, kids are that way.
Yeah. My daughter will frequently show me a video or like a TikTok thing or whatever, and that I will be expected to find it hilarious. And sometimes I don't understand the premise of the thing anyway. And I try to hang in there, but like, then there'll be like 18 swears in it. And she'll be like, but don't like, never mind about that. Just like, so she's recalling what she found to be humorous about it, not the part that like through an adult lens would be problematic. And so it ruins the occasion of the bonding if I'm pointing out like, I don't know, this feels like a lot of swears, right? So like, so sometimes I have to pick my battles. It feels like this grandma and this granddaughter are doing pretty great. So
Mhm.
yay for them.
Mhm.
Any other questions? That was it? Okay, well, this is like perfect timing and everything. I have thoroughly enjoyed this hour. I
Me
wish
too,
you could stay
guys.
longer. I'd love to do this again. So thank you so much for coming. It was really a pleasure for me. If anybody wants to do something similar to like this again, please let me know and I can maybe get up the nerve to do it again. So thank you so much for tonight. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.